You're watching Euronews Tonight. I'm Ramzadi, and these are the headlines this hour. Mariupol continues to be the focus of Russia's eastern offensive as reports emerge of a possible chemical attack on the port city, something the US says it can't confirm and Russia denies happening. President Putin says the military operation in Ukraine is going as planned as he vows that Russia's goals will be achieved.
Several people have been shot inside a New York City subway station. Here in the Cube, we're across the latest.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson, his wife and the Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak are all fined by the police for breaching COVID rules during lockdown. Good evening. Fighting is continuing in eastern Ukraine as the battle for control of the besieged port city of Mariupol appears to be reaching a critical stage. Fierce fighting rages in the Azovstal industrial district as Russian troops inch closer to the port. UK and US governments are also working to verify reports of a possible Russian chemical attack. It follows claims from Ukrainian authorities that 3 soldiers had been affected by a poisonous substance. The Pentagon says it cannot confirm the attacks, but admitted that the potential use of chemical weapons in Ukraine is deeply concerning. Russia denies the allegations. President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused the EU of not providing Ukraine with enough weapons to repel Russian attacks. Addressing the Lithuanian parliament, Zelensky stressed that lives were being lost and called on Brussels to help bolster Ukraine's war effort. It comes as a new report from the UN says nearly 2/3 of all Ukrainian children have been displaced since the start of Russia's invasion. Meanwhile, Russia's President Vladimir Putin declared that he had made the right decision to invade Ukraine and vowed to calmly press on. Following a visit to the Vostochny Cosmodrome spaceport in Russia's Far East with his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko, Putin insisted that Moscow will not be isolated. He says that Western sanctions have failed to disarm the Kremlin's war machine and described his ambitions as clear and noble.
We know that today our officers are participating in the special military operation in the Donbass in Ukraine, providing assistance to the People's Republics of Donbass. They are courageous, competent, efficient, and they effectively use the most modern types of weapons with unique, unparalleled characteristics.
Well, for more, let's now bring in our correspondent, Sasha Vakalina, who joins me in the studio. Sasha, always good to see you. So, President Putin is saying that Russia's not going to stop until it achieves its goals. We know they're concentrating their offensive in the east, in particular the port city of Mariupol. So, how long can Mariupol hold out?
Well, we have seen over the past couple of days, specifically yesterday and today, there have been reports that the battle for Mariupol is nearing its end. These reports were called fake by Ukrainian officials. They say that the Ukrainian forces that are still in the city, in central part and in the port, the part of the port of Mariupol, they're still holding out against Russia. So this is the official information by Ukrainian officials. We've also heard earlier from Ukraine's forces commander-in-chief. He said that military still had stable, open lines of communication with the soldiers inside Mariupol. As well, Zelensky, president of Ukraine, said that Ukraine and Ukrainian forces could deblock Mariupol. They could go there, but they do need for that to have more weapons and more planes and more help from Western allies.
And Sasha, last night we began seeing reports of a possible chemical attack in Mariupol. Now, the US says that it cannot confirm the reports, but Russia has used chemicals in previous battles, hasn't it?
Yes, that's it. So it cannot be investigated, and all the sides are saying the same, because for that, the investigation into the use of chemical weapons is really complicated. There should be a special commission by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. They have to be on site. This is not possible, of course, in Mariupol. Now, Ukrainian officials, that was the Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense, said based on preliminary data, there's an assumption this could have been phosphorus munition. Now, this is tricky. Phosphorus is not classed as chemical weapons unless it is used close to civilians. Then it is illegal. Russia denies all the accusations. The country also says that it destroyed the last chemical weapons stocks back in 2017, but even since then there were 2 cases of Russia using chemical weapons. And then, of course, there is Syria, where Russia got involved and also with the usage of chemical weapons. And Western analysts are saying here that this is called sort of Syrian playbook. Well, Russia could try now, when it comes to chemical weapons, to go first little, like small deniable operations, which West might not necessarily react to straight away, and then they increase the scale of it. The question here is, where are those red lines that NATO and Western partners of Ukraine said would be crossed if Russia uses the chemical weapons? And also, what will they do then if those are crossed?
Exactly, what will they do? Well, Sasha Vaklina, thank you as always for updating us on the latest from the war in Ukraine. Thank you so much. Well, as the shadow of war looms over the east of Ukraine, aid agencies are doing what they can to help people who flee their homes as well as those who choose to stay on. Well, the ICRC spokesperson in Ukraine, Lucille Marbeau, joins us now to explain what's happening in Dnipro. Ms. Marbeau, thanks so much for joining us on the programme tonight. So how bad is the situation then on the ground in Dnipro? Are you able to get those much-needed supplies in and out?
So fortunately, Dnipro has been, since the escalation of the conflict at the end of February, a safe haven for many, many people fleeing frontline cities. So people here have been transiting from Kharkiv, from the east, from Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, densely populated areas. We're seeing an influx right now of people arriving from the east, but also people from the south in Mariupol. So what we're doing here is really assisting shelters where people are staying. So it's really giving the basics. It's going to be food, water, hygiene items, mattresses, blankets, everything they need. And next to the train station, for instance, there is a shelter where people often overnight, for those especially who really want to flee further west to safety, but also to join family members who are further west or who also maybe are in neighboring countries. So our work here in Dnipro is really to assist those who are fleeing the hard-hit areas.
So let's come to the opening then of humanitarian corridors out of Mariupol. We know that it's been difficult, but you were also involved in a convoy that evacuated people from Zaporizhia. How precarious was that?
Well, so we were fortunately able to lead to safety around 1,000 civilians from Berdyansk to Zaporizhia. Many came from Mariupol, and what they told us was really dire. Many of them leave the city walking, so they're exposing themselves to extreme danger as hostilities are ongoing. Our team was 20 kilometers away from Mariupol, but because of the security situation there, we could see that there was ongoing fighting. Of course, we couldn't access the city directly. And as we know, and this is unfortunately everywhere when there's armed conflict, hostilities in cities, truce is always precarious. It's very fragile, so you can have an agreement on the top between the capitals for safe passage for civilians, but then in the ground you see that there is actually hostilities ongoing. So regarding those that we were able to assist from Mariupol, they were saying that the humanitarian situation was absolutely terrible. Of course, for weeks there has been no water, no food, no electricity, no medication, no access, of course, to health services, and barely any connectivity. And for those who boarded our buses, we had 7 buses, 350 people boarded them, mostly elderly families. Also private cars joined us, 7 at the beginning. It was 100 cars in the end, so around 1,000 civilians who really joined the convoy because there's the symbol of the Red Cross, the emblem of protection, bringing them to safety. So the people were relieved, really, when they were boarding the buses, but many also were telling us that they had left family behind. And as there's barely any connectivity, how can they know if they're safe and well? How can they know if they're still alive? So the people are immensely relieved. They have also, I mean, they're very weak physically, psychologically, of course, but at least now they're safe. But they're extremely worried, of course, for the families that they have left behind.
Exactly. I mean, the situation that you paint on the ground is quite desperate. Now, we're seeing figures today from the UN that 4.5 million children have been displaced since the start of this war. So for those children then that you are helping, are they able to process what is happening to them?
Well, of course, these children, as the families themselves, need, of course, psychosocial support because they have gone really through a lot. Our concern also is for unaccompanied minors. So when I was on the convoy, there were 2 unaccompanied minors, and there was one 14-year-old teenager who had basically been sent away by her parents, staying in Mariupol, to her brother in Zaporizhzhia. So now she's safe because she's with her brother. But of course, this girl was really exposed to immense danger traveling on her own. She left the city walking. And these are immediate safety concerns, of course, when we know that some children are traveling alone and need, of course, utmost protection in that case. So what also we do, of course, is really answer the first needs of children. It's going to be things as simple as diapers, because people can't purchase them. They don't necessarily have the money. And of course, assist the parents, because if the parents feel secure, the child, of course, will also feel secure. The children will usually really also feel the anxiety, the distress of the parents, and this is going to have an immediate impact on them directly. So the safer the parents feel, of course, it's going to help also the child to feel safe himself.
Indeed. Lucille Marbeau, ICRC spokesperson in Ukraine, thank you so much for updating us on the situation as you try to help people on the ground fleeing this war in Ukraine. Thank you so much. Now, at least 5 people have been shot at a subway station in Brooklyn, US authorities have confirmed. Our team in the Cube have been working to verify what we know about this incident so far. Let's find out more with Matthew.
This incident occurred during Tuesday morning rush hour inside a New York City borough. A police spokeswoman confirmed that officers were called to an incident in southern Brooklyn inside a subway station at around 8:27 local time. We now know that at least 16 people were injured in this incident. That includes 10 people who suffered gunshot wounds. 5 of those are now reported to be in a critical but stable condition, and there are no indications of any life-threatening injuries. A fire department spokesperson also said that smoke had filled the station. Graphic images from the scene, which we won't be showing you, they show passengers bloodied and lying on the floor being tended to inside this Brooklyn subway station. And as you can see from pictures outside the subway station as well, there was a vast emergency service personnel. We know that authorities have cordoned off the scene while an investigation is underway, and people are urged to avoid the area. There is still very little indication or early information about any motives or any suspects in this incident. But the New York City Police Commissioner has now told reporters that a suspect wearing a constructive type vest put on a gas mask before opening a canister and then opening fire on the train. The incident is not being treated as terrorism-related at this stage, but authorities are investigating, and the New York City Mayor, State Governor, and President Joe Biden are all also monitoring the situation. There are also reports of unexploded explosive or smoke devices inside the station, but we now know that New York City Police Department have confirmed there are no active explosives at this stage. Here in the Cube, Marianne, we'll keep you updated on this active shooting incident inside a Brooklyn subway station in New York City.
OK, Matthew, thank you for updating us there on that incident. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Chancellor Rishi Sunak have been fined for attending parties during the COVID-19 lockdown. London's Metropolitan Police handed out more than 50 fixed penalty notices as part of its investigation into unlawful gatherings held by the government while lockdown measures were in place. Johnson and Sunak are the first Prime Minister and Chancellor to have been fined for breaking the law while in office. The leader of the opposition Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has called for both Johnson and Sunak to step down, joining a growing list of lawmakers demanding their resignations. The First Ministers of Scotland and Wales have also said that the Prime Minister and his Chancellor must go. Boris Johnson has repeatedly denied breaking any lockdown laws, which has led to his opponents to accuse him of misleading Parliament. Well, back in January, the Prime Minister apologised for the way the situation was handled. Take a look.
But firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone. We ask people across this country to make the most extraordinary sacrifices, not to meet loved ones, not to visit relatives before they died. And I understand the anger that people feel.
Well, our reporter Tig Enright joins us now from London for the latest. Tig, good to see you. So Boris Johnson is the first sitting Prime Minister to be fined for breaking the law. Rishi Sunak, the first Chancellor to be fined. Now, they've both previously denied to Parliament that they attended any parties. Are their positions now untenable?
Well, we've not actually heard from either of them as of yet, but I think all indications are that Prime Minister Boris Johnson has no intention of resigning or going easily. He won't be following those calls from opposition leaders and leaders of the UK nations to do so. And arguably, he's in a stronger position now than he was earlier this year when this scandal reached its climax. Firstly, because the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, as you mentioned there, he was then seen as the primary challenger to Boris Johnson. Now he's been shown to be a lawbreaker too, and he's been battling his own separate political problems because of the tax status of his very, very wealthy wife. So the threat from him has been neutralised. That leaves it next of all to Conservative MPs to potentially stick the knife in. Many of them expressed truly heartfelt outrage at the scandal of Downing Street lockdown parties when the scandal broke a few months ago. But now, even Boris Johnson's worst critics within the party, the leader of the party in Scotland, Douglas Ross, who first called on him to resign, has said that now, because of the war in Ukraine, is not a time for a change in leadership, even though some critics have pointed out that Britain during World War II did replace Neville Chamberlain with Winston Churchill as Prime Minister. But the one weakness in Boris Johnson's position is that there could be a drip-drip effect going on here. This is just one fine for one party. We know he's suspected of being at other parties, so there could be yet more fines to come, and that could escalate the pressure upon him.
OK, so Tig, you mentioned there that there's no intention to resign just yet. But let's talk about these local elections that are coming up in May. Many in the Conservative Party, of course, fear a fallout from the so-called Partygate scandal. So how important do you think voters consider these local elections to be?
Well, they're very important, and certainly they're a barometer of voter opinion. And of course, while local elections don't influence government per se, they're effectively an opinion poll ahead of the next general election, which some people think there's preparations for it to take place next year. You know, a few weeks ago, a poll of voters here suggested that a majority wanted Boris Johnson to resign if he was indeed fined for these parties. Now that has indeed happened. Now we're heading into these elections in a few weeks' time, which if nothing changes, the Conservative Party will have been shown to be sitting on their hands with a law-breaking Prime Minister at the helm. And there will be inevitably a fresh wave of storytelling, contrast between what people were doing at all those moments in their personal lives during lockdown, perhaps not seeing loved ones who are dying in hospital at a time when Boris Johnson and his officials were having parties in Downing Street. You know, the Brexit wave of support which brought Boris Johnson to power, which won him the biggest majority that his party has known in a generation, is clearly over. Now he's dealing with a cost of living crisis of historic proportions and, of course, an historic scandal of law-breaking at the very heart of government. But cast your mind forward to a few weeks' time, and even if those local election results are bad, nobody expects the war in Ukraine to end any time soon. So the same arguments will prevail then, that perhaps now is not the time for a change in leadership. Mariam?
OK, Tig, we'll leave it there. But thank you for updating us on these difficult times ahead for the Prime Minister and his party. Thank you so much. Now, switching gears, Sri Lanka's government has taken the dramatic step of suspending payments on its $25 billion in international debts, with $7 billion in repayments due this year. Protesters aimed much of their anger at the ruling Rajapaksa family, who have been in power for 2 decades. Ordinary families have faced shortages of food, fuel and other essentials. The government's loan repayments are being halted while the International Monetary Fund organises a bailout plan. US inflation is growing at its fastest pace in more than 40 years. Consumer prices jumped by 8.5% in March since the previous year, making it the biggest year-on-year increase since 1981. Petrol is also up 48% and food is up 10%. Economists say the sharp rise is due to the supply chain disruptions made worse by the war in Ukraine, coupled with high consumer demand. 263 million more people could be living in extreme poverty by the end of this year, according to a new report from Oxfam. The aid agency is also warning that millions are now facing mass starvation across East Africa, the Sahel, Yemen and Syria. Oxfam says the situation has been aggravated by rising inflation, the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine. The Champions League quarter-final second legs get underway this evening. Holders Chelsea have to do it all as they travel to Spanish giants Real Madrid. Thomas Tuchel's side are 3-1 down from the first leg. Now in the last 8 tie, Villarreal are away to Bayern Munich. The Spanish hold a 1-0 advantage over the German champions heading into tonight's fixture. Now, veterinary hospitals in Kyiv are on a mission to save pets that have been left behind. One such clinic has tended to hundreds of injured cats and dogs since the beginning of the war and is urging animal lovers to provide them with a new home. Sergio Ferreira de Almeida reports now. Take a look.
While Ukrainian citizens are enduring unimaginable suffering, their animals are also victims of the war. Many have died in explosions, others of starvation. They have been exposed to the same horrors as the human owners. And those who have survived, like these dogs in Borodyanka, are now abandoned. A Kiev veterinary clinic with dozens of volunteers is helping to change the course of these stories. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, it has rescued hundreds of pets.
Our mission is help for dogs who come for us from different cities. It's from Bucha, from Irpin, from Gostomel, who lost their home, who lost their owners. Some of them have owners, but owners go without them. And then we try to find their first owner.
Oh.
Their first owners. And save them. And when they will be healthy, we're ready to take it to new home, or maybe find old home, and save as many lives of dogs and cats as it's only possible.
They arrive angry and wounded with bomb fragments. They receive all the treatment that they need, and after everything that they have been through, these animals have the chance of a new life, a new home.
We are working as volunteer photographers and make photos of all animals for site of this clinic, and everybody can choose the animal and grab it to their home.
All the rooms of this clinic are always full of pets and volunteers because dogs and cats must be accompanied 24 hours a day, and every day more animals are arriving. Sergio Ferreira de Almeida in Kiev for Euronews.
A reminder there of, sadly, all the victims of this war in Ukraine. Well, that's it for the programme. From myself and the team, take care. Bye-bye.